Karen Attiah was the last black woman opinion columnist at the Washington Post, and she just posted on her Substack that she was fired. She was fired for quoting Charlie Kirk's own words. I repeat, she was fired for quoting Charlie Kirk's own words. That should tell you everything that you need to know, not only about who Charlie Kirk was, but the world that we live in right now today. Quoting Charlie Kirk, she posted the following on Blue Sky, quote, "Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go and steal a white person's slot." That's Charlie Kirk in his own words.
I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
Karen quoted him, and for that, the Post said she was unacceptable and guilty of, quote, gross misconduct and somehow, quote, endangering the safety of colleagues. Then they fired her without even so much as a conversation. But now let's zoom out a little bit further so that you can see that this didn't happen in a vacuum. The Washington Post is in the middle of a top-down reset. They have a new publisher, Will Lewis, new opinions editor, Adam O'Neill, and they have a new mandate, less racial reckoning and more quote-unquote free markets and personal liberty. That is coded language for conservatism. The staff was told that the changes would be ambitious, and if you weren't on board, that you probably should take a buyout. Karen didn't take the buyout, and when her post drew heat, leadership had the excuse they needed to finally get rid of her. This is the playbook across U.S. media right now. In fact, it's not just media, it is all across business and industry. Billionaires buying legacy papers, outlets are leaning further to the right underneath the banner of balance. Take a look at the Baltimore Sun. They were just sold to Sinclair Media. Take a look at Paramount and CBS. It's the same pattern. Free speech for them, but not for us. But you need to see just how transparent this moment is. There's no ambiguity here, folks. They are absolutely targeting everyone that is black and everyone that is not a conservative. Here's what the Washington Post told Karen as she reported in her own Substack. They said that her posts were unacceptable. But in the context of Charlie Kirk, she did only two things. Number one, she quoted him directly, and everything else that she said was a condemnation of gun violence in this country. So when they said that her posts were unacceptable, what she actually said was, quote, political violence has no place in this country, but we will do nothing to curb the guns used to carry it out. America is sick and there is no cure in sight. Imagine calling this unacceptable when the reality is every word that she said is true. Charlie Kirk died because of gun violence. She did not say anything about Charlie Kirk except quoting his own words. But this statement is absolutely true. The next thing they charged her with was saying that she was guilty of gross misconduct. Here's what she actually said. She quoted Charlie Kirk's racist remarks, and then she condemned violence. She didn't even condemn his words. She only quoted his words. What she condemned was violence and named hypocrisy. Gross misconduct in journalism means plagiarism or fabrication or harassment, not quoting a public figure, not saying that America worships guns and worships violence. Then they said that she was endangering her colleagues. Houseway. What she actually said was, quote, part of what keeps America so violent is the insistence on absolution for white men who espouse hatred and violence. This is absolutely true. The man who killed Charlie Kirk was a white man. And if naming white male violence endangers colleagues, then any journalist covering extremism is at risk of being fired. This is not only illogical, but it empowers the very people that she is warning against. It does not protect the staff to fire her over her words, condemning violence and identifying how America absolves white men of their violence. And then they said that it was done in poor taste. What part is done in poor taste? Using Charlie Kirk's own words? Is that poor taste? Because I agree, Charlie Kirk's words were always in poor taste, always in poor form, and always highly bigoted. But that's his words, not hers. What part was in poor taste, Washington Post? The fact that she refused to perform over-the-top grief for someone who has demeaned black women? Is that what you wanted her to do? To say we're so sad about Charlie Kirk, even though he spent the entirety of his career. In fact, his career was built on the backs of black women and how he demeaned them. Tone policing is not journalistic integrity. It's management branding dissent as misconduct. And this is the nature of the world in which we currently live. And the hypocrisy, my friends, is glaring. When Bari Weiss quit the New York Times claiming she was silenced, she landed book deals, Substack riches, her own media startup, and now she's being considered to head up CBS. Institutions bent over backward to frame her as a free speech martyr. But Karen Attiah, she condemned violence, she quoted Charlie Kirk's own words, and then she was fired. No golden parachute, no institutional protection, no promotion, and I guarantee you that we will not get any glowing profiles about her bravery at these mainstream institutions. The difference? Bari Weiss fits the acceptable profile. Karen Attiah is a black woman and the last one left in the Washington Post opinion section, and she was pushed out in the middle of a national trend. Black women losing their jobs at a staggering rate, more than 300,000 just since Donald Trump returned into office. That is not a coincidence. That is intentional and that is structural. Here's what the Washington Post is essentially telling Karen, that she's fired because she refused to perform care for white male victims. She refused to perform empathy for someone who didn't believe in empathy. They wanted her to stay polite or for her to stay quiet. They did not want Karen to tell the truth. They did not want her to name the violence. And especially, they did not want her to point out racial double standards at a time where white conservatives and MAGA are performing their greatest feat of racial solidarity. And because of that, the Washington Post said that her behavior represented gross misconduct. Folks, Karen Attiah's firing wasn't about misconduct. It was about power and control over black voices, particularly the voice of a black woman, especially at the time when white supremacy is performing their greatest feat of racial solidarity. Her posts were factual, they were precise, and they were morally urgent. They exposed America's racial double standards. And by firing her, the Washington Post reinforced those very racial double standards, showing that if you have the nerve to bluntly call out white male violence, that they will fire you. They will label it as unacceptable. They will label it as a threat to your colleagues. They will label it as gross misconduct, all while protecting the reputation of white conservatives. That is the message. If you're not willing to perform empathy and compassion for those who have none for you, you can't work in the United States of America. You can't work at the Washington Post. That is not journalism. That is censorship. No, we're not surprised, but we need everyone to realize what time it really is. This is the shift, a great shift in the United States of America, and you must absolutely be prepared for this new phase. We'll talk about how we do that in the next few videos. But now I need you to hit that share, like, and subscribe button, and I need you to go over to Substack and subscribe to Karen Attiah.